Hey, so this is the first vid I've made in a while. Sorry, once again, the quality is not what I want it to be. You would be surprised how hard it was for me to get the lighting just as good as it is in this new apartment that I'm in because it's really uneven and it's either dark as night or it's so bright you can see my pale skin like glowing. So I had to maneuver around a lot to find this angle. And kind of tying into that, that's why it's been a while since I made my last video. I really wanted there to be major technical improvements before I made any more videos here, as I promised. And I do promise you this, one way or the other, either this channel will be put on permanent hiatus or disbanded, or I will make the technical improvements I promised. It's just, I'm not quite to that phase of life yet where I've got things fully back to normal as they've been for the last 3 years. I'm not going to go into all that now, but they're just about there. And once they're there, I'm going to start devoting some more time and energy to this channel again for the first time in almost 3 years. I do swear to you. I just have a little further to go before things are fully back together for me. But anyways, I decided to start making videos again, just, in the meantime. And this one was one that I had, I think, a pretty good reason for making because it's been a while since I made an incel video, or a long, long time since I made a video about Elliot Rogers. First one I made a long time ago I took down just so the YouTube wouldn't ever flag it, which they might flag this one because I'm going to be making some references to him here. And even if I completely disavow everything about Elliot Rogers, they might still not like the way I do it. So as I found with one of my videos on black pill ideology, even though I was disavowing it, they still took it down. But anyways, what's kind of inspired me to make this was two different things. One was a couple of nights ago, I went to kind of a parody, like a risque parody of the Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And it was basically just a play that mocks it with some kind of goofy, strip dancing and a comedian halfway through it and some other stuff like that. And it was on the whole okay. However, it was really, really cramped seating. Like they had it in this big metal shed. And this is Phoenix, Arizona. It wasn't fully air conditioned, so they had these big fans set up just to keep it from becoming like an oven in there. But the seating was actually worse than the heat because it was just so cramped. And the two people I was, crammed between, as it was, the people I was there with, I was crammed really close to the couple that was sitting next to me that I didn't know. And they were a couple who got a little bit frisky with each other throughout the performance. That's their right, and all that to do. But I'll admit it was a little hard to ignore sometimes because, they were sitting so close to me to the point that I was literally touching against them throughout the whole, hour and a half. And I'll admit one thing that kind of made it even more a little aggravating for me, which is why I'm making this video, is that the girl was one you could say was kind of my type. She was, a kind of an alt, I don't know, I describe her as a cross between like a punk rock or a little bit of an alt girl. Pretty. The guy she was with looked like a dork, which is maybe why I felt a little bit envious the whole time when she was there with him. But the reason this is also kind of what I chose to make a video about this is also today I was watching a video about Elliot Rogers for the first time in a long time. And it kind of reminded me of a long time ago when I listened to the audiobook of his manifesto. I believe it was called My Twisted World, where he described kind of his life events and what led him to do the shootings of Isla Vista back in 2014. And what I kind of was thinking about when I was watching the video is the maker of this video, which I did attach a link for below, though she didn't just explicitly blame men and blame incels. She did spend a lot of the video, talking about how it was sexist ideology that drove Elliot Rodger to do what he did. It was, misogyny. And while that definitely was a part of it, Elliot Rodger was both a neo-Nazi and a psycho, sexist, against women, believed in really weird things about how women shouldn't be able to make their own decisions, but whatever, it's not really worth going into all the details. But to be honest with you, Now again, this is why I'm afraid YouTube might eventually flag this video or something. So I have to be very careful how I word it, but who knows? They might flag it whatever I say. I completely disavow everything about Elliot Rodgers, okay? Let me start off saying that he was a horrible person. He was a terrorist. He was mentally ill, okay? But there's a reason why so many people listened to his audiobook, read it, and why, to a small extent, even though I very begrudgingly admit this, find a little bit of his life story relatable. And particularly for me, and I'm going to go into that a little bit, but the specific reason it came to my mind with the incident I mentioned earlier, which, sorry if I'm kind of jumping around, but I'm just trying to tie it in a little bit here, was that Elliot Rodger, whenever he saw a couple that kind of aggravated him and made him feel upset, he would get like really mad out in public, and he would like throw, I think once at a Starbucks, he threw his coffee at them. He would harass couples who were like, in a park or whatever. And while I've never ever at any point in my life had the desire to actually just attack a couple around me, I do know a little bit of what it's like to feel that little bit of resentment when you see a couple, particularly where it's a girl that you like, and they're kind of showing PDA, or even worse, if they're just being a little bit obnoxious, kind of like the couple was next to me, last night at the play, where you almost felt like they were trying, like, because I was sitting next to the girl during the video, and I kind of got or the movie, why do I keep calling the video? Because, like, she was trying to make sure something that I knew that, like, not to engage with her or something, like by getting just ultra, flirty with her boyfriend or guy that she was there with or whatever. And it was just kind of obnoxious a little bit throughout the play. But again, the reason I also relate this to it wasn't a big deal or anything. I mean, I'm not trying to say this was like this life altering event, but it's not the first time. I mean, I'm 36, I've seen and been in this situation numerous times before, but it just kind of reminded me then when I was watching that video of Elliot Rodgers and made me decide to make a video about this. And the reason is to kind of talk to, people as to why for those who wonder why anyone would in any way, shape, or form, read Elliot Rodgers' manifesto or listen to the audiobook that was put up on YouTube that gets taken down all the time, or why would anyone relate to anything of his life story. Some of the reasoning behind that, while again, not trying to in any way justify anything he did, he was completely wrong. I have to say that over and over, but I'm still going to probably get this video flagged. People will take it the wrong way. But also then to the incels who do take it too far and who actually do idolize him and heroize him and, try to say that he was in the right. As somebody who understands Elliot Rodgers' life story probably, and to some extent better than a lot of you would, because certain aspects of it, I hate to admit, are kind of relatable to my own. Why it is you should, not go down that road. As someone who's been, unfortunately, just a little, and I mean not a lot, but a little down that road myself, why you shouldn't go all the way down it. Now, to just quickly preface it, for those that don't know, I'm 36. The only times I've ever actually had anything like a relationship, I mean, I've been on a few dates. I've lost my virginity, but I had to pay to do it, going to legalized brothels in Nevada. And that's pretty much my dating history thus far in 36 years, And Elliot Rodger, at the time when he did the shooting, I believe he was 22, which actually at the time I was 24 in 2014. So he wasn't a lot younger than I was. But, some of things about why he was unsuccessful with women, I kind of understand. And some of his frustrations, I do kind of find a little bit relatable. For instance, one, I do find, relatable, probably the biggest, kind of get it out of the way, was that Elliot Rodgers, throughout his life story, from what I remember in My Twisted World, was that he had a lot of problems with being too quiet, too socially reclusive, too reserved throughout his life, both growing up and as he got into early adult years. That is something I have struggled with to a greater extent than most people ever will. And I'm not just saying that, and I know some of you can't actually understand from watching this, and I probably shouldn't, this is more information about myself than I should post on the internet. because people will pick apart anything you do put online. But the thing is, when I was really young, like especially, under the age of like 12, I really, really, really was quiet and tried to stay away from people for reasons that I don't even entirely remember. I just remember wanting to get off from the crowd and just wanting to, disassociate with other people because it just overwhelmed me a lot. And as I got older into my teen years and 20s, I started realizing I had a problem and that was not a positive thing for succeeding in society, in socializing or in your career or in anything in life, but in particular in dating. So I started trying to do things about it, but unfortunately, in my teens, 20s, and 30s, all the actions I've taken really haven't been enough to overwhelm, I guess you could say, the bad start I got socially in life. And I still struggle with a lot of things socially, even now in my mid to late 30s. And the biggest one is dating. And again, I don't want to make this all about a life rant or anything, but that's just to kind of summarize one thing. And Elliot Rogers had a lot of those same issues. Growing up, he didn't seem completely socially incompetent. He had probably more friends than I had growing up. But he definitely, had troubles with girls in particular, socializing with them. And it didn't help that he had some massively sexist ideas as well as some racist ones. But sorry, that was just something I thought I heard in my apartment. But anyways, what I was just going to say is that I understand, that angle. I understand what it's like to be that way. I understand what it's like to be on the outside looking in. And when he would write, things in his book about how he would, be driving along and he'd watch people who, seem to be happy and having a good time, going out and socializing, and he'd wonder what's wrong with me. Why can't I connect? I hate to admit it, but I've been in that same situation many times throughout my life thus far in life, where I've looked around and just thought, why is it I can't, just be more normal? Why can't I fit in better? Why can't I be better at socializing? And there's even more to it than that, but I'm not going to go on the big rant on all this. But bottom line is, I understand certain aspects of his life. And another thing I understand, for the incels, that relates to the dating part of it, Elliot Rogers, he didn't have everything going against him. He wasn't a particularly ugly person. He wasn't especially good looking, but he was average, He didn't have much of a career or anything like that going for him, but he came from money, and I can tell you that, can help you too, even though I don't come from money. But I manage money all day, and I can assure you it helps if you have that. But I'm average looking. I'd say I have an average career at least, enough that it wouldn't be a problem for me with dating. But even still, it hasn't been enough to do much for me. And sometimes, I understand his frustration. I look around and I think, what am I doing so wrong? And it's, I've tried numerous times to fix it, and it never seems to get better. And he was only 22 at the time, and I'm 36. I can see when he would write those things in his book, about his frustrations. But, that doesn't obviously justify what he did. It doesn't justify the violence. It doesn't justify his ideology. But what I would just say to people, who do empathize with him is that the best lies are told with elements of truth. And Elliot Rogers' life story, a small part of it is relatable, but that's not a reason to take the rest of what he said and did seriously. He may have been it may have been somewhat empathetic, certain things that happened with him throughout his life. And again, you're talking to somebody who probably can relate to some tragic elements of his life better than the average person can, better than most people can. But I still do not empathize with the direction that he went down on it because, for one, 22 is not that old. You got a long ways ahead of you for developing your life and your dating life and everything, And I'm a lot further ahead than he is, and I haven't yet done anything, any retribution or anything. Nor do I have any plans to. And where I'm also going with this for those also who, would look at Elliot Rogers and say, and who are aware, the, video I watched, which I attached the link to, where they'd wonder, how could anyone relate to any of this? It's all crazy. Well, again, I understand why you would find it hard to relate to the violent aspect of what he did and a lot of the crazy stuff he said. but try to understand certain elements of his life, his dysfunctional social life, his misunderstandings about dating and other people. It's kind of a very normal thing. And for guys, it is more typical to be under, 30 and just not have any relationship at all. Or even in my case, just in your under 40 and not have one. And, from the female side of it, let me put it this way. There are many women who emphasize with like female serial killers, who have like that one female prostitute whose name I forget, but she committed a bunch of murders to the, truckers who solicited sex for her along the road. And people will say, well, she was justified in what she did. Well, obviously not. She was murdering, men who were innocent. Yeah, they were soliciting sex from her, and she claims they were raping her. But well, don't solicit. When you're that's pretty hard to make that accusation when you're soliciting sex from random people on the road, as a prostitute. But either way, what I guess I'm kind of going a little off in case you start to get into a dish with this. But where I'm going with this is that try to understand, even though sometimes people will look at a little bit of one's life story and they'll think, because I am in the same boat to a small extent, and think, the rest of it's relatable, and they'll go all the way down that road, which they shouldn't. That's what kind of goes on with the incels that look at Elliot Rodgers and think, I'm in the same boat as him, and then I relate to him, and and then they heroize him. Again, they're not right for that. Just like anyone who heroizes, women who kill men, and then say it's in the name of feminism, are not right for doing so. But, right, I guess it's like I said, the main thing I'm just trying to go with this is for those incels in particular that are watching this and, do put Elliot Rodgers on a pedestal. Again, I understand better than most why you do so. I read the full or listened to the full audiobook, that he posted. I understand, to a much greater extent than he probably ever did, certain aspects of isolation, loneliness, and a lack of success in that area. But I don't see it as a means for violence. And this isn't like meant to be a brag or anything. I just spent most of this video telling you all sorts of things that are wrong with my life. Okay, I'm just saying this is a way of somebody who's already kind of fucked up in many areas of my social life thus far in life. I understand what it's like, and I also understand that it's not a reason for empathizing more than you should with the life path he took. And like I said, it's one thing also I can say on about the whole thing too is that even if, I'll admit to you, I still don't really know how to fix areas like that in my life. I'm 36 and still working on it, and still working on my crappy YouTube channel, still working on my crappy career and things like that. But the one thing I can say is this, I understand to a greater extent than most people do, the frustration a lot of incels feel and all that. Because, like I said, it's something I've been trying to fix throughout all my life. It's probably the biggest disappointment of my life thus far to date, But I can assure you a lot of the things you find in incel forums, a lot of the ideologies about Chads and Stacy's, a lot of the, idealization of Elliot Rodgers, the idealization of other, incel leaders, a lot of it, I can assure you, isn't the right path to go down. Like for instance, a guy whose channel I listened to a little bit recently who's an incel called Loser Maxine. If you just search Loser Maxine with 2 X's in the word, it'll pop up on YouTube. He's about the same age as me and definitely defines himself as an incel. And he has a different view than I do of most things about, the dating world. For instance, he's got a different hand dealt to him in life. He's tall, whereas I'm short. He sounds like he's not particularly good looking. He's bald, and he claims to not be very good looking. But, I'm not good looking. I'm just average looking, I guess. But I'm just saying we have different, pluses and minuses. But, I listened to his life story, and certain aspects are actually also relatable to that, or like Elliot Rodgers, where he had a lot of social problems growing up, which usually is the biggest indicator of if you're going to have problems dating, is if you have major social problems making connections, it doesn't matter. The rest of it doesn't really matter. You're going to have problems in the dating world. But he takes the approach that it's just, that society and dating is just fucked. and that it's all over. And I don't know what his opinion on Elliot Rodgers is. I know he doesn't endorse violence, but he numerous times will just say how he's given up and he's fine with it. But then he also complains about it. He's not fine with it. And, I mean, I don't really like him, even though I've listened to his channel, because I kind of see him as going down a different path than I'm going down, but just the same problem, but a different solution to that. His is just to kind of cement himself as someone who's not ever going to date and just, I guess accept it as it is. My solution, I guess, is to just continue to try at least for a while longer in life. I see it as it's just, kind of an unusual problem I have. And it's just one that has to be worked on over time. It's unfortunately one that I'm not going to be able to solve overnight. It's one that there are bigger problems in the world. These right now, like I mentioned earlier at the start of the video, for the last 5 years, I've had way more problems with work than I've had with my social life. And that I would honestly prefer to get that, where I'm not just constantly being flung between jobs and hating my job. I would prefer that to be, kind of brought to balance before I get anything else in my life back in order. But where I'm going with this is that, to both incels and to people that are, I guess against incels or look at them from afar and wonder what on earth even causes it. I don't know what the solution is, but I can tell you as somebody who's been in the same boat for a long time, my whole life, that I do believe that there's a different path than what Loser Maxine would say, and especially what Elliot Rodger would say on that. I think the best path to go down on that is one of just focusing on what your weaknesses are and trying to find what blend of it makes you happy on that. Maybe you don't want to get married. Maybe maybe you don't even really want to date that much. Maybe you just want to have sporadic hookups or whatever. Maybe you want to get married. And even if it's kind of a loveless, sexless marriage or whatever, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling a little bit here. But what I'm just saying is this, I've kind of accepted already one thing, and that is that whatever my dating life, if it ever does fully materialize, it's going to be a lot different than I originally ever thought. It's probably going to be different type of girl than I would have ever imagined when I was younger. Probably going to be a less traditional arrangement than I ever would have imagined, coming from an extremely conservative religious background that I've abandoned. But you have to kind of be willing to adapt, And again, this is not talking at you as somebody who has all the answers. I don't have the answers. I don't have all the solutions for my life or for yours. But what I can just tell you is this. I'm far enough down this road and have gone far enough down it, and to a greater extent than most people, to know what is definitely not the answer. And I can tell you the idea of just resigning yourself to the black pill ideology or to, especially to one of violence like Elliot Rodger, that's really not the answer. That's all I can tell you. I know that I know what it feels like in many occasions to be on the outside looking in, but I can say this much. There are worse things in the world, and there's worse things too than being single and unsuccessful at dating, even if the worst happens and you don't do it. I've been single for 36 years, and really the most unpleasant part about it has just been the fact that I've been trying for 36 years and failing. It's, if I had just, not cared at all about it, it'd be one thing, but, I have made an effort at it. And again, if you don't really want to do it at all, like I said, there's plenty of positive aspects to being single. But what I would just, encourage on that is that if you do feel that there's areas that you can improve on in your life, or, that there's at least, you really truly think, you want to improve on it, don't listen to guys like Loser Maxine who just want to say that it's all just your genetics that determine it, or the hand that's dealt to you early on in life. Because I can say this, to some extent, we do make our own destinies in life. I don't know exactly what extent, is programmed at the start and what is, what part of it is dealt to us. But I can tell you this, it isn't just a pure, you're born this way and, your life plays out automatically for you. But anyways, like I said, hopefully that wasn't not just a completely incoherent rant. Like I said, the technical quality here isn't much improved from last time, so sorry. But like I said, that is my number one goal for this channel, and I can promise you, if it doesn't improve, eventually I will abandon the channel or put on a permanent hiatus or something. But I will improve it because eventually things are slowly but surely kind of coming together for my personal life. So, it shouldn't be long before I can start putting some major attention back on this channel as well. And again, thank you for your patience throughout all these years, and suffering through me with this. And as usual, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.